Welcome to another episode of Mind the Gap. We're going to be joined today by Adam Lacey, who is the co-founder of Assemble U, the award-winning specialist in podcast-style learning, the host of the Assemble U Expert Series, and the co-host of the Assembly podcast, where he interviews L&D leaders about challenges they're facing and new innovations within the industry. During his 13 plus years in the learning industry, he supported L&D departments tackling a diverse range of challenges, and he's here today to share some of his experience. More importantly, Adam is also a partner of Calidus, so it's great to have you here. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Fabulous to be here, Harry.
And you've managed to make it down on a fairly dreary day to Bristol, so I appreciate you doing that for us as well.
No problem at all.
Shall I'll hand this back to you so you've got it. Hopefully we'll be able to do that, right? Starting to get slightly warm as well. So today, Adam, we're planning to talk about building high-performing teams and connecting skills to business metrics. So as you're very familiar with working in the L&D space, this is a really important topic for organisations, something that we're focusing on with the organisations that we both partner with as customers. It's really about driving organisational outcomes and where skills and performance link together. So hopefully we can dig into that topic a little bit more together. Before that, though, I wanted to warm up with the usual quick-fire questions just to get our brains in gear. So what's one thing that's consuming lots of your thinking at the moment?
Well, I'm a kind of owner of a small business, of a startup. So if I'm being completely honest, it's growth and how are we growing, how are we getting our stuff to market, and also do we have the right product mix to meet the needs of the future in a fast changing and ever adapting kind of economic environment.
Yeah, look, I think you're being a bit unfair on a small startup. You're an established player in the L&D space with a really great product. So, but look, understand, I can imagine the amount of time that you spend thinking about the growth of your business. It's a passion and excitement for you in terms of where you're going.
Very much so.
What's one piece of recent learning that everyone who's listening could benefit from that you've undertaken?
So I'm doing a lot of research at the moment on a new series we're doing with Liggy Web called Inquiring Minds, and it's basically on how to think in the age of AI. One of the things I came across that stuck with me in the last couple of weeks is about getting to the source of data. So actually uncovering where the inputs that you're getting are coming from, rather than just taking what you see at kind of face value. So someone telling you some information, maybe laced with bias, maybe laced with opinion, maybe laced with an ulterior motive. Can you get to the actual kind of the crux and the get under the skin of where that data is coming from and what it really means? If you're able to do that, it's gonna support better decision-making processes. So yeah, that's one thing that I would say I've learned in the last week.
So data-led fact-checking, basically, kind of getting below the skin, especially I guess with the idea of hallucination with AI and other things. Is that where we're thinking?
100%, yeah, and technology unfortunately is basically not helping things because it is making more information available more quickly, and it's not putting the rigor in place to kind of support that real deep dive that I think we need to understand where data points actually originate.
When's that out? Do you know, or is it in the build at the moment?
It's in the build. So we recorded 5 episodes yesterday, and we've got another 5 episodes to record tomorrow. We're speaking in October, so I don't know when this will end of October. So this will come out obviously in a few weeks. And yeah, we hope to get it out by the end of 2025, early 2026.
Brilliant, it's exciting. Last one then. One thing you wish you'd known earlier in your career that you bank now.
Network. The power of network. And I think you can't, and I'm drumming this into the team all the time because I really, really want them to focus on building their network. I think when you need some advice, when you want to test something out, when you need your first customers as a new business owner, when you want to get a new job, whatever it is, the power of your network amplifies everything that you do and makes that whole job a lot easier. And what I wish I'd done is, in my 20s, spent more time investing in my network early days, because it's something that I take pretty seriously now. But I think the earlier the better.
Any kind of tips for getting started in terms of, or how you built your network to where it is now?
Yeah, I mean, reach out to people. Start a podcast. There's a great one, because I've managed to interview in the last two to 3 years so many great people and learn so much from them. And actually, an invite onto a podcast is really nice, and you get to kind of broaden your horizons. But I think just reach out to people. You'd be surprised how many people are willing to offer advice, offer support, offer how be part of a wider network.
Nice. Well, I appreciate you jumping in with those three starters for us. The main topic is about building high-performing teams and connecting skills to business metrics. We said critical for L&D and our mutual customers and partners in our space, but the broader L&D space. So hopefully we can add some context and some value in terms of our discussion there. We're going to break this up into some different themes that we want to talk about, and the first one is really around the context of this and setting the scene. So around 74% of leaders, according to Deloitte, see measuring human performance as a critical factor. Obviously, that's pretty standard, makes sense. But the reality is probably only 17% believe they're actually delivering a positive outcome. What do you think high performance looks like? What does high performing team look like to you? And how do you define high performance, especially in 2025 with the complete change that we've gone through this year?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting one. I thought quite a lot about this, and I actually thought a lot about people that I've worked with in the past and teams I've been a part of that were especially sort of high performing, I guess. And I think there's a number of attributes. Obviously, one of them is they might be very technically competent and know their skill and know their kind of area very, very well. But if you look a bit broader than that, I think there's a set of skills that nearly every high-performing person possesses, and that's the ability to solve problems, it's the ability to test new ideas, it's having a kind of a curiosity for what's new and what's different. It's being humble enough to know that you don't always have the answer, and it's being self-aware enough to be able to adapt and change when you do get constructive feedback or any kind of feedback, and to use that as a lesson and to not take it in a kind of negative way, which is obviously our natural human reaction. So actually, high performance is also about control of emotions, and this is something that Licky and I talked a lot about yesterday. Actually, was how do you control your emotions in order to make better decisions, rather than just reacting in the first way that comes to mind. In 2025, I definitely think it's about operating in a psychologically safe space. I think it's as a team, that team needs to be able to share failure and celebrate failure. There's a concept of kind of failure Prosecco that I kind of like, where companies, this was a podcast we did a while ago, but they talked about every time there was a big failure in the business, they actually physically got a bottle of bubbly out and kind of celebrated that failure, but used it as a way to go through the lessons that they'd learned. And I feel that takes a very psychologically safe space to be able to achieve that. I think they're, high-performing teams are respectful of each other's time. They are elevating rather than competing. I'll talk a little bit about that later, maybe. And these days, they are augmenting technology, not outsourcing. And I think that's a really important point as well. We can touch on that a little bit with regards to AI.
Yeah, I really like. The reality is, there's so many different elements that you can, when you look at high-performing teams, and be able to call out. I do think, especially now, this idea of being able to change. The pace of change is so fast that we need to be able to understand and deal with it, and actually understand that we own change as individuals as well. It doesn't happen to us; it's how we respond to change. And I think that's a concept that's not always isn't always discussed. It's almost like, oh, we're going to go through this change curve and something's going to happen to us. But actually, it's how you are able to deal with and react to change, and how you own the change as an individual. I think those individuals that shape the change then and start to own that is a really interesting concept.
It's agency. It's understanding that you have agency over your time and what you do, even if there are external factors that are outside of your control. There are always things that you do have control on. I think high-performing people, high-performing teams, understand what they do have control on, take agency of that, and do something about it.
Yeah. When you're looking at team performance and you're looking at the kind of new world of hybrid, remote working, obviously there's a bit of a pushback to the office with some organisations too, but typically hybrid, but fast changing is really probably the term that you'd use to describe it. How have expectations of team performance changed? Do you think there's a difference, or do you think it's the same as it always was?
There's an issue with technology in that the better technology has got. I'm not just talking about AI here, I'm talking about SaaS products over the last 10, 15, 20 years. The better technology has got, the more expectation there has been from senior leaders to achieve more with less, to have people working faster and achieving more, basically. And technology is the kind of the big antidote for that. I think the same problem remains, and this has been the case in the last kind of 10, 15 years, but the skills gap between how to best use that technology and how people are using it is a challenge and a problem. What we're seeing now in the last year or so is that being massively exacerbated, because all of a sudden we've got this very fancy, almost all-purpose technology in the form of large language models that can help us in all sorts of different things that they couldn't before. And the worst thing about them in many ways is that there are free versions available, and so people are going on and using them at will without any kind of controls and without any proper training or skills support around that.
Yeah, I've got a slightly, and again, with everything that's new, you've got to go through different kind of hype curves, all the other stuff, and I think especially with AI, what I find really interesting is when you look at maybe a contrarian viewpoint, and it links to performance generally and specifically skills. When you look at individuals and their skill set to be able to deliver successful outcomes or projects, and performance is linked to that project outcome, for example, there are core capabilities that are missing in understanding how to deliver that. And if you look at IT projects, ERP projects, most projects that are delivered in organisations, they're failing at like a 70 to 80% rate. That's the kind of standard. Large scale projects. So what I'm surprised about is that we as organisations are expecting to layer over the fastest moving technology in AI and be like, well, yeah, we're going to get more success quicker. No, what you're going to do is probably get to failure faster. And you're seeing that now with MIT coming out with 95% failure rates. You're seeing RAND come out with 80 to 90%. You're seeing that, and it's kind of interesting. I think it comes back to that there's some fundamentals about creating the skills and capability and making sure you understand what the outcome and the performance outcome you're trying to drive before you go and layer over some fancy new fast-moving technology as an example.
Very, very true. And yeah, there's a new term that I read about the other week called work slop, which is basically the unfiltered output of large language models when someone hasn't properly thought about the inputs and not put the care and attention into it. And you saw it in Australia recently when Deloitte Australia put together a multi-$100,000 report for the Australian government, and half the citations, well not half, a number of the citations were fabricated or hallucinated by AI.
And just not been checked.
And just haven't been checked properly. Yeah. And
so back to your point about
exactly. So that's the real risk between that gap almost between how people are using it and what the expectations. And just to touch on hybrid, because I think that's a really important point, and that's really changed the way that knowledge workers in particular, obviously not frontline workers, but knowledge workers operate in the last 4 or 5 years. I think the kind of the incidental skills development you get from being in the same room, the same office as someone, everyone has recognised that is more of a challenge. And so I think one of the things that we need to really think carefully about in learning and development, but just in all businesses, is how can we be more deliberate in filling that gap? So how can we create more opportunities for people to get together, to share? How can we make it easier for people to ask questions quickly? But also, how can we make information more readily available? Because I think a lot of the time, when say you're in the first 3 months of a new role, you just ask the person next to you, like, how's this work? How's that work? How do I do my holiday thing again? And if you're not getting that because you're not with them, then you need an alternative, and you need a really good repository of company information or something like that to help support it. But I guess not enough thought in a lot of organisations has gone into that bit, and that's probably slowing down the rate at which people become productive in a company. So
and high performing. Yeah, it's really interesting for me. Like, again, in the office, there's a buzz, and I think the other bit is about this kind of like psychological safety is a key part about creating high performing teams. We talked about all these other skills and capabilities, but there's something that I think is probably not talked about. It's like this idea of energy and momentum, and how you can feel it. Because when I go into the office, I feel this buzz. I do feel this buzz. You have this energy. There's something that you feel progress almost happening, if that makes sense. And you have these side conversations. You hear some new information that's like, something's changed in a positive way. Maybe something's not moving in the way that you want it to, but you're able to act immediately with that person on that. Versus in the hybrid environment, there is this kind of, there's definitely ways that you move quicker, and there's definitely elements, but I think this energy or this momentum thing is harder to feel sometimes when you're not in person. And I think there is something about that in high performing teams as well, that there's this energy, there's a movement, there's a propulsion, there's a movement forward, there's a collective.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is they're able to solve problems together quickly, and there are, there's Slack, there's Teams, you can hop on a quick call and you can normally solve problems. I think the worst thing you see in organisations is when an issue arises and it is left to fester, and it is exacerbated often by people not being in the same location. Because if they're in the same location, they can just lean over and be like, actually, can we have a quick 5 minutes about that? So yeah, I think you're right. That's a real that can sap energy. That can do the opposite. And I think if you're gonna kind of keep that energy going, that's a big part of high performance.
What do you think is the biggest gap between how organisations think about performance and actually how they build it and create a culture, the skills, whatever else we may think in relation to that? But yeah, what do you think the biggest gap is?
I think it's chronic underinvestment. To be honest with you, and I'm not just talking about money. You've got to put your self-awareness hat on here. But I'm a learning and development vendor, so of course I'm going to say give your L&D teams more money. But actually, it's not just about money. It's about time, and like you mentioned there, it's about culture. So, does everyone in the business have permission to spend time developing and learning new skills, or do they have so much going on every day and so much packed in their diary that they're trying to squeeze 6:05 on a Tuesday, they're trying to squeeze a bit of learning in because they've got so many other things on their plate. So I think it's much broader than just monetary investment in this stuff. It is kind of culturally, where does it fit in, and then that then bleeds into how do you reward development of skills, and are you rewarding development of skills, and are you promoting and amplifying, and does your pay provision and your compensation relate to things like how quickly people adapt, how quickly people bring on new skills, how quickly people move into new roles and add value? Because there are ways of doing that, and you can incentivize the right behaviours, and I think that's a big part of it as well.
It's often two-dimensional. You've got performance versus behaviours. Is often how people look at talent, for example. I think the third dimension is skills capability that you should be looking at, and your rewards program should align behind that. And I think some organisations are there, but certainly something for us that we've probably been quite two-dimensional historically, but now we're looking at that skills capability framework and being like, are people progressing in terms of the right skills that we're saying are necessary for the role, but generally, are they adding extra skills capability? They're showing that growth mindset, which is part of the culture of development. It's interesting, the other part you just said about, I think I've got to say it because I'm going to, but L&D need more money to invest in this, but they also need to be able to prove the impact of that investment and the outcomes that they're driving, and that outcome needs to be performance. For sitting as CEOs of organisations, our investments, we have to be like, well, to the extent we can, we're getting some level of return, a positive impact to the organisation. I think that L&D needs to think in that way and engage with the stakeholders to make sure they understand what individual, team, organisational performance outcomes they need to link those efforts to and measure.
Very much so. Yeah. I think we're going to maybe talk about C-suite a bit later on. Yeah. But if you ask any CEO who is in a for-profit organisation, so just to be super clear, for-profit organisation, we live in a capitalist world, right? There are three things that CEOs really care about: revenue, costs, and risk. Those are the three kind of big things, and actually risk feeds into costs. So really, it's revenue and costs. Those are the two big ones, and it's very important to link what you're doing to that wherever you are in the business, especially in learning.
Nice. Should we move on to a bit about how we think about building high-performing teams?
Yeah, let's talk about that.
We talked a little bit. Research suggests things like psychological safety, purpose, a shared understanding. We talked a little bit about them in our kind of introduction as the top three traits kind of standing out. But when you think of high-performing teams you work with, what's made them exceptional? What skills, mindset, leadership, anything else that you think kind of jumps in there?
This is slightly self-serving to say this, but I genuinely think it's the critical behavioural skills. So how resilient are you? How curious are you? How sceptical are you when you're presented with data or with analysis? How analytical are you? Can you think critically? Can you adapt to new environments quickly? All of that stuff, I think, is the critical kind of skill sets that underpin any high-performing individual. And then I talked earlier about being humble as well, because I think that's a good one, and just like leaving your ego at the door. And that feeds into this sort of concept of being a lifelong learner, and how do you make sure that you are constantly updating and reacting and investing in your own skills as well, because I think there's so much a company can do or an organisation can do to encourage skill development, but then actually you as the individual have to take the time to really invest in your development, your skills. If you care about promotions, if you care about earning more money, all that kind of stuff, that is where you need to spend your time, I'd say.
Yeah, I think intrinsically is the individual that you own your own development, right? Yeah. The organisation can provide the opportunities, and that's what we've got to make sure that we support with as partners to organisations that want to do that. But you own your own development. I think one of the interesting things that probably is kind of it's difficult balance is you need to have that element of also that constructive, challenging feedback. Like my personal belief, and I think I talked about this actually when we first. When I was on your podcast, my biggest growth has happened when I've had some challenging feedback. I'm like, well, actually, yeah, I see that. That's an opportunity for me to work on that, and there's an opportunity for growth. I think you have to have a mindset where you're open to that. But now I know that feeling slightly uncomfortable, that feeling of not feeling kind of, there's something that's when the growth happens, when you get that kind of, and I think having that culture, which is really, it's difficult to get right because feedback can be delivered wrong, as we know, and also feedback can be acted on in the wrong way as well, even if it's delivered in the right way. It can be a case of the individual doesn't necessarily have the understanding or capability to actually take that and move it forward. And so it's quite a hard balance to get all of those things right in a culture, but I guess it all makes up part of that culture of high performance.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you've got an environment that is safe enough that people feel confident enough to fail in certain things. Obviously, there's degrees of failure. There's kind of bankrupting the company, and then there's just getting something wrong with a client. And there's different.
There's a
scale, yeah, obviously. But generally speaking, most failures are small and can be overcome. And I think that having that safety in there will then help people build confidence in the next time. I always think kind of building resilience is always an inflection point. Something bad happens, and then do you let it happen to you, or do you take the bull by the horns a little bit and learn the lesson from it and bounce back stronger, or do you just kind of collapse and move out the industry or just whatever? So I think that's always and you're right. Those inflection points are really important actually, and they build resilience and they build mental toughness and strength, and they build confidence. And actually, I've got a story from my first job. So it was a company called Streetcar. They were bought by a business called Zipcar. The car hire by the hour. It was a UK startup. It was a real success story actually. They did really well. And I got inserted into, it was my first job out of uni. I got inserted into this very high-paced environment. And we had a call centre in Wimbledon, and we were handling all the calls. And actually, everybody, wherever you worked in the business, basically for the first couple of years of you being there, had to go and work a shift in the call centre on Saturdays, or Sundays, which was great actually. Well, it was annoying at the time when you're trying to have a social life in your 20s, but yeah, you kind
on
reflection, yeah, you can see why it was done, and actually it was really smart. One of the things I'll always remember from that was that you were always kind of dealing with crises. So on a weekend, most of the team weren't there. You just had the customer success team and a few drivers out and about fixing problems and stuff like that. And you get one of these calls, which is just a completely dreaded call. Someone has taken a car from London. They're broken down on the M1 somewhere near, like in the north of England, and it's raining like mad. And they're on the side of the motorway, and the car won't start. And things happen, things happen. They're well maintained. You just can't help it sometimes. And then the guy on the phone goes, and I'm trying to get back, and it's one of these days where the rain is terrible, and so we're in touch with the RAC, and they're saying it's going to be 4 hours, it's going to be 5 hours. He's like, it's my wedding anniversary today. I'm trying to get back for my wife. She's absolutely furious that I made this trip anyway, and now you're telling me I'm not going to be back for like 7 or 8 hours. And that kind of customer service moment is horrible. But the team there, this is one of the great things about that business. They were completely empowered to solve problems, especially on the weekend when there was no senior people around. And so they very quickly got the person's address from the details that we had on them, got an emergency kind of call to a florist nearby, got a massive bouquet of flowers delivered to the wife to say sorry about missing the anniversary. And even though that guy was stuck on the M1 for however many hours, that was a kind of a customer they then had for life. It cost the company, I don't know, probably 60, 70 quid at that time in London for a big bouquet of flowers to be delivered quickly. But the kind of the value that that earned that business in terms of, I guess, social equity and and the power of that decision, and having the confidence as basically a customer service person to be able to make that call, spend that money, and make that happen. And that was very much celebrated in the organisation, and that takes a certain confidence and a certain place where, like, even if we mess this up, we knew we were going to get into trouble because we were trying to do the right thing, and that's really kind of important.
Ownership and accountability, really, for the problems.
All of those things.
Yeah, that sounds like it's weird because I started my career on the phones.
Yeah.
Cold calling people, and I look back on it really fondly in terms of you don't often get the opportunity to try and speak to business leaders, trying to promote change how they're going to do their work, but all the skills that it gives you. But I think that what you're saying is in line with high performance. It's that idea that you need to give people the opportunity to make decisions and actually fail fast, but actually more often than not, in this example, as you say, like, people make the right call, right?
Yeah.
They're not setting out to make the wrong decision, and they can create a lifelong customer, as you just said there.
And the permission to be creative, that's the other thing, because I think so many organisations now have a structure to doing everything. Whereas if you just say, if the rule is, if something's gone wrong and it's basically our fault for whatever reason, make a sensible decision to make it up to the customer, and you make a call on what that looks like. In this case, it was some flowers delivered, that stuff I think is really, really important. But that is definitely one of the hallmarks for me of high performing teams, is the trust that exists between the organisation and the individuals, but B, the fact that those individuals knew that they could do that, and even if they got it wrong, they weren't going to get into trouble.
Yeah, no, I like that. Culturally, that's a really interesting concept. I think that trust is always my way is trust is there until it's broken. And if it's broken, then that obviously creates a different conversation. But I think also trust can be earned as well in terms of the way that people operate. So it's interesting because you're basically saying at an entry level role, trusted to do that. I think that's an interesting.
Well, I think it was a supervisor that probably made the decision, but that was just above an entry level role basically.
I really like it.
But you're right, lead with trust, and I think the whole trust being built is a little bit of a fallacy sometimes, because you're almost saying then, we're waiting for this person to be trustworthy enough, where what you said first time is actually the way to lead.
I think for me it's most people have integrity, they do the right thing when nobody's looking, right? Yeah. That's the kind of definition for us inside our organisation, and it's a case of lead with trust. People are going to do the right thing, and then if it is broken, that's a different conversation. You have to work out what that looks like, but I think intrinsically most people set out to do the right thing. What if you were to look at some of the mistakes that organisations make in engineering, which I don't even know if I like that term. I've written down as a question. I think that's kind of interesting, but there is probably some engineering of high performance, isn't there, that's needed? What do you think the mistakes are that are made?
I think trying to insert competition is one, actually. And you see this a lot in commercial teams or sales teams, where you might have leaderboards or you might have things like that. Because you have incentives that pit team members against each other in some way. And whilst in some environments it can be successful, I think overall you're better off leading with a reward system that rewards people that share and elevate everybody. So let's take the sales team example. Instead of having 3 or 4 top performers in a sales team of 10, would you rather have 10 top performers? And the answer is always 10. But if you're incentivizing your sales team just on their individual performance, you're going to get a few people that are really good, and then you get people and then those people want to protect their knowledge and their experience and what they've learned, instead of sharing that with the other people that aren't doing as well. So that's definitely one of the big ones, is inserting some kind of competition or false competition. And I say the other one is just that, in my experience, not everyone can be a top performer and can be a high performer, and it's important as a business leader or in learning and development to recognise this, because not everyone is capable of hitting the performance goals that you might want them to hit. And by the way, that is fine. I think one of the issues we encountered at Streetcar, and I can talk about this constantly now because the company is this was a while ago, was that they hired all these amazing graduates, like super smart people, and they I'm not counting me as one of the super smart people. I'm one of the, I was on like the lower end of that scale for sure. They had all these really smart people who were super high performers, but very like within a couple of years moved on. So they had a kind of retention issue around that, almost because they had a few too many kind of these aces in the team. And so I think there's a real as a business leader, you've got to get that balance right between the two, but also you've got to recognise and work to the strengths of the people that you have. Yeah, and yes, there'll be examples where all right, they're not a good fit, and actually they don't do what you need them to do, and so you help them onto their next role. But in a lot of cases, you will find actually they're really amazing in that very distinct area, and so we're gonna build, we're gonna support them doing really well there instead of pulling them into this other thing that we kind of envisage as what high performance looks like.
Yeah, I think when you think about if you do map talent in your organisation, you need this core of people that aren't necessarily all the way at the top right and aren't always going to be there, but they're delivering, they're executing at a level that's going to consistently deliver for your business. And I think that's all. Don't want to label them as a term. We seem to have a label for high performers. I don't know what you call them, but the individuals that don't necessarily want to get there. I also think that, interestingly, for me, when I look at it, and this is again for me, I'm passionate about this topic, but the idea of the outcome and the purpose being aligned in terms of what you're trying to deliver. So can you? I know statistically, I think it's like 19% of organisations, if you look at Deloitte's most recent report, physically link performance and outcomes well, and skills and outcomes well. So 80% of organisations aren't doing it well. There's a huge opportunity there for us, and for us all to think about, well, what does that really look like? But I also think there's an interesting link between an outcome and purpose and the reason to get out of bed. I'm doing something exciting. Like again, if you think about the world of reskilling and upskilling, for me, I feel passionate and excited about that daily, to kind of get out of bed and be like, how are we going to change, WEF say 1 billion people need to be reskilled and upskilled by 2030. How can we make an impact on what that actually looks like? What does that do for people's careers? The other thing that I think is the idea that performance needs development, as far as I'm concerned. You have to have development as part of that cycle, and the performance conversation starts development. It is cyclical for me. It kind of goes in this continuous cycle. And if you look again, 94% of people leave because of lack of development. And so, you said it earlier, linking back to what you said, it's a retention problem if you don't develop your people. That means that good performance conversations aren't happening. But if those performance conversations aren't linked to outcomes, then you're not going to drive what the business wants. So you need to be able to link all of these dots, join all of these dots together, as far as I'm concerned, to kind of create high performance. But a culture development is such a key part of performance that I don't think it's always focused on or discussed enough.
Yeah, agree completely. Yeah, development's kind of critical to any high performance, and just thinking about it. Also having somewhere for people to go is another one. I think when you've got very high performing teams, a lot of the time they're looking for like, what's next? What can I progress into? So thinking carefully about progression pathways, about how the company is expanding, about different opportunities, about sideway moves as well. I'm a big fan of the work that people like School Careers do in terms of it doesn't always have to be a junior, senior, manager, director kind of route. You can go in lots of different directions, and I think thinking about that in relation to your high performers, in relation to your skills development, is really, really important. And actually, that's almost why developing some of these kind of critical behavioural, very transferable skills is so important, because it enables more horizontal movement of people around an organisation, and that in turn allows you to keep more people.
Yeah, I think it's interesting as well, this new world of, I guess, efficiency and effective teams. The old reality is I have to become a manager to be successful. Actually becoming an expert and layering up your skill set around a specific capability, I think, is also those paths of I don't have to manage teams, because often what we see is the best or most capable person, high performer, becomes the manager, but they're not necessarily equipped to be a good manager. They're a good individual contributor, and it's like, well, how do we carry on that path in that individual contributor to still be rewarded, supported, developed in the right way? There is also, I thought I'd just come back to one other, a lot of finance organisations, I think private equity especially, obviously quite a large industry, they've got a concept which is up or out.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's the way that's the way you think about it. If you don't get to that next level, go from principal analyst up to whatever it is next to partner at the top, you're going to go out. Probably.
You move somewhere else to do it. Yeah. I think there are definitely industries still like that, but I think a lot of organisations now are recognising that very hierarchical approach to career is not always what people want as well. I think if you can offer individuals the opportunity to do something within your organisation that maybe they've never done, and this is what I quite like about the old school grad schemes, when you would spend like 6 months or a year in different places to kind of work out actually where your passion lies and where you're good. And I think there's a lot more of that we can do within organisations doing placements. I had friends who in our 20s, they went and worked for another company for a year because they managed that account full time. Say, I think this was like it was PwC and Sainsbury's. So they were at Sainsbury's and their big account was P&G. Sorry, that makes more sense. Procter and Gamble. And so they went and worked on site with P&G for a year and just got a completely different set of experience to what they'd normally get. So yeah, there's definitely creative ways you can get around not just kind of skills, but also experiences behind performers and experiences to develop people in different ways, which I think think creatively.
Yeah. Have you got any examples at Assemble U specifically that you can share around a company or a customer that's helped shape conversation of high performance?
Well, I guess a lot of what we do at Assemble U is helping try and help develop those core skills around high performance, and we certainly at the moment seeing a lot of interest, usage, engagement in some of the, I guess what I call like the grey areas of the non-black and white bits of people's jobs. So like, how do you have a really difficult conversation? How do you handle when someone's coming back to work after something's happened, or how do you support yourself or others through change? So I think we're seeing a lot more usage of that sort of content and a lot more engagement with that, and I think that's definitely making me I guess reflective of what's going on in the wider world and the kind of the challenges that organisations are facing at the moment.
It's I think when you look at the perception, I think what we're talking about, I don't like this term, but like the idea is often called softer skills, right? In terms of their ability to be able to support high performance. When you actually look at the studies, it's really interesting. When you look at the impact, again, things around some of those around psychological safety, supporting people in understanding how to deal with difficult conversations, whatever it may be, those typically are leaned on as softer skills and often ignored by organisations. But actually, research suggests that they actually have a higher impact on a potential high-performing culture, a high-performing team, and so do need to be addressed. So I think your reflections are a very valuable one, backed up in the data. I have to try and find it, maybe we can link it in the comments, the exact article that I recently read, but it highlights exactly that you need to focus on some of those areas to actually create high-performing capability. It'd be good to talk about connecting skills to business metrics too, and kind of thinking about that, because again, going back to, I think I said it earlier, if you think about skills and performance outcomes, the percentages are below 20 typically in terms of number of organisations that are actually executing against this. And for us, as an industry, I think it's our job as partners in terms of to our customers to support them in trying to prove the value of their investment, but also for L&D inside organisations, there's a need to prove organisational outcomes. There's a need to prove the link of developing people and impacting the organisation. I know that the most recent Deloitte, I'm just reading it here, the most recent Deloitte study suggests that only 16% of organisations have actually got skills data in a place where they can effectively link it to business transformation or success or outcomes ultimately. So a low percentage really in the scheme of things. Skills isn't something new, performance isn't something new. Why do you think connecting skills development to business outcomes is still such a challenge for a lot of organisations?
So there are quite a few steps removed from each other. In that, if you think about a really important soft skill, and there's a reason, by the way, that I use business critical skills now instead of soft skills, because someone told me that about a year and a half ago, and I was just like, that's a way better way of describing it. So that's what I use now. Excuse me.
I still call them. I think they're all skills, right? I don't know if there needs to be that level of differentiation, but maybe. Business critical.
Business critical. Yeah, I think that's like, oh, okay, I'll pay attention to business critical.
Yeah,
Maybe that's just a marketing thing. But if you think about decision making, right? So if you make a better decision, you're probably going to have a better performance. And if you've got your whole team of 100 people making better decisions, that performance is going to be elevated. We all know that. We all know that better decisions equals high performance equals more revenue, etc. But how do you measure the 1,500 small decisions we make every day as individuals, and how do you then feed that into kind of a business outcome that might be months and months down the road? So it's really, really tricky, and I think that's the issue. The fact that it is hard means that a lot of people just don't bother, and they look for easier kind of routes instead. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing, any skills development in this area is a contributing factor rather than the one thing that affects the thing you're trying to affect. So say it's decision making and revenue, right? It's not just going to be the decisions that you make that affect that revenue. It's going to be the decisions plus the wider economic environment plus all sorts of different things will affect what happens in the end there. And so it's then measuring it as part of a bigger set of things, and those other things are also really hard to measure. What's the macroeconomic effect on people buying, learning things right now? Well, we might feel that actually, we feel like it feels bad, or it doesn't feel great, or it feels really good right now because of this and that. But that's quite hard to measure as well. So there's all these sort of intangibles that make it really, really tricky.
Yeah, and I can't disagree that there's complexity in it for sure. I think one of the ways that we're thinking about it as an organisation is looking at how you can link the skill to development, the development activity to an objective. The objective obviously is then linked to a global or a larger kind of theme, and so there's kind of drawing some lines of connectivity so you can start to see how are these things, or these collective things, starting to impact either individual team or business performance. But I do agree that it's definitely complex. Do you think there's also what's the right way to say this? I guess, do you think there's a gap in sometimes the link between the executive objective and direction of business and what L&D are working on? Do you think that sometimes can be visible?
Definitely, yeah. I think so, and I think that is the problem of learning and development professionals as much as the business in many cases, and it's definitely solvable. I think there are always metrics you can influence, and there are definitely metrics you can claim to have influenced or taken a part in influencing, and that is powerful in many ways. And so you've got to go looking for them, and I think the way you do that is that you've got to really, really understand your business, so understand it inside out. My advice on that, and this is advice from learning leaders I've spoken to the last 2 years on the podcast, and they will repeat this again and again, some of the best ones, is you've got to get out there and talk to people, and you've got to talk to different people in your business, especially in larger organisations. That might mean sitting in on team meetings, it might mean taking people for coffee. These could be senior people, it could be more junior people, depending on what you're looking for. But you've got to identify the areas where you can really support skills development and support performance, and you've got to know what you're trying to influence. And to know what you're trying to influence, you've got to understand what that business unit is trying to do. So this business unit is responsible for this delivery or this project or this execution. You've got to understand that, understand the numbers they're challenged with, and then work backwards to say, right, okay, where are the skills gaps and what things can we influence to help you? I interviewed Adela, who was on the Spotify learning team for 11 years, and she came out with a really great analogy, which was what they were doing at Spotify was they were, as a learning team, and they called their learning brand internally was called the Greenhouse. So it's all about growth, and I really love that actually. Yeah. That's another conversation about like internal learning brands, which I think is really important. But what she said was, what we were trying to do was we're basically trying to lay the track for the train to move faster. And I was like, okay, I like that. They weren't determining the direction; they were just connecting up the different parts of the organisation, and the track was almost the skills, and that enabled the train performance to move a lot quicker. And when you're in a business like Spotify, I can't remember what she said, but it went from like 1,000 people to 20,000 people in like 8 years or so. Yeah, it was we all know Spotify, crazy growth, and just how important and critical that was. And that was a very high performing, and still is a very high performing environment. If you look at any of these huge kind of tech successes in the last 10 years. So that I found that analogy really interesting, and I think that's a really smart way to look at it. And you only really get there by deeply understanding the business, and that's not when someone comes to you and says I need a course on this. That's not just delivering a course on that. That is understanding why. Ask that. There's a thing called the 5 whys, which are kind of like, which is basically like a toddler. Yeah. So why do you need that? Okay, they get the answer. Okay, so why is that a problem right now? They give another answer like, okay, so why? you just keep going until you get to the root cause. And then you're more likely to say, okay, well, actually, what you need is a cheat sheet, not a course, or what you need is a better system or process. You don't actually need a piece of learning. And if it is a piece of learning, then how does that fit in with the wider stuff that you're doing in the organisation? And then I think if you can have that organisational wide view, and it's difficult to achieve because you need to have a lot of relationships internally, you need to have a lot of social influence internally, you need to have all these things. But I would really focus on that. It's probably I'm going to do an episode soon with someone on like first 90 days in a new L&D role. So I've not done one of those before, and I think that would be one of the pieces of advice I certainly hear is almost like a kind of a talking, listening, a listening tour. And you're just going around listening and listening and listening before you do anything.
I spoke to John mentioned it, John Roche from Fitness First, but others come into an organisation, start to take action before having done that listening, and then being like, hang on, I'm just doing the same thing that I've always done. That's not the right approach for this. I'm in a new organisation, and then going and doing the listening, especially going at different levels in the stakeholder group, right? At the exec, at the management level, and then like this term, and again, it's like walking the corridors almost. It's like listening to try and understand what's going on inside the organisation. I know that's a bit old school now because the corridors are now teams probably, but trying to get an understanding. But I also like what you said earlier is, and this is again, even if you're thinking about rolling out skills as a concept, making sure that you're thinking about what the outcome is. If you start in a smaller, controlled environment, so let's say again, sales is one that's very kind of tangible in terms of the impact that you can make. Right, it could be a revenue impact, but regardless of where it is, if you go and pick a problem that's important, again, aligned to the strategy, aligned to the organisation, and you understand what the metric is you're trying to change, and then start to work back from that outcome of the problem. I think that's key for L&D going forward, and organisations as a whole. And I also do think that there's something to be said about, there are some core kind of, metrics like retention. How can we retain more people? Well, if we know that 94% of people are leaving because of lack of development, let's say in your EMPS survey, you're starting to see that people are saying lack of development's a reason for leaving, or as it often is, you leave your manager. What if we start to develop our managers? So we start to see retention reducing. Retention has a pound, dollar, whatever cost associated with it, right? Hiring and retaining people has a cost. It'd be interesting. I think there's a core set of metrics that you could start to look at, or you can go down to like a narrow, let's go focus on customer satisfaction. How do you work with the customer success team to work on that, or the customer support team? Go and pick something that we can go and measure. So I really like that. Interestingly, I think that if you are able to think about linking the outcome, and there's a visibility of that outcome, an understanding of the outcome more as well, the knowledge of it. I kind of think about this, I don't know whether you manifest or you spend any time thinking about or trying to create your ideas, but for me, the microphone. Someone had that idea that there was going to be this device that ultimately picks up sound clearly and transmits it somewhere else. That was never my idea or never my dream, but someone's managed to come up with that idea and build it, and it was someone's idea, right? It's the same concept. We have to give the outcome, we have to give the goal, we have to give that direction, all the other conditions around psychological safety, everything else, but they have to believe in it, they have to believe that they can get there too. I think L&D plays a role in supporting with that too, in terms of an understanding.
Yeah, and just it's as simple as explaining why to somebody. So if you're asking people, and this is one of the big challenges in the industry is always around things like engagement and people aren't interested in doing this, and the reason they're not interested is because they haven't been told why, and they haven't been given a good enough reason to do it. If you're given a good enough reason to do anything, you will do it, and you'll find time to get it done. But you need that good enough reason, and it needs to be super clear to the individual. So then you need to have a kind of communication thing there. How are you positioning what you're doing, and how are you positioning it to how people achieve the goals and the targets that they're trying to achieve, and in turn get them earning more money, get them promoted, get them kind of to be high performers and really outstanding. I think if people understand that journey and that method, then they're more likely to appreciate why they're being asked to do so. It's always been a challenge with compliance training, to be honest with you, because a lot of people look at it and just groan or click through it. And I think there's been more of a movement in the last 5-10 years in particular around explaining more of the risks around not being compliant, so people actually understand why they're doing it, and that certainly helps. You look at some of the stuff in the news in the last year around cyber attacks at Marks and Spencer's, Jaguar Land Rover, and all this kind of stuff, and just the impact that has had not just on that organisation but on hundreds of organisations and the whole supply chain and those kind of issues. And then people start to go, oh, actually, yeah, that cybersecurity training I got sent, that's quite important. I better do that. But it's that context is super important.
You got. I think you have to. For me as well, I kind of have to see it. I have to think about it. And if there's not, you don't have that understanding of why I'm going to go and spend my time doing this, it just doesn't feel like it's worthwhile. What about you're leading Assemble U at the moment? How can companies communicate the value of learning and development in a language that resonates with the C-suite? You're the leader, co-founder of Assemble U. You're setting the direction.
Yeah, co-CEO almost. Rich and I haven't done that yet. We did think about it, and we just call ourselves co-founders at the moment. I think at some point we'll get to co-CEO. Maybe when we get a little bit bigger, we'll be like, okay, we can justify a CEO title each now. We're.
The great thing about founding companies, you get to define all that stuff. You're allowed to do whatever you want.
Yeah, that is a good point. Yes, and influencing the C-suite. Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, it's if you're a for-profit, it's the big metrics of revenue, costs, and risk. I think there's always per person and deeper kind of things you can tap into. But if we're being brutally honest, those are the three primary drivers, and then the other stuff generally comes afterwards. So I would say try and tie to one of those things, even if it's not directly correlated as much as possible. And actually, for learning and development in particular, there's a lot that can be done around cost saving. And I think there's a lot of waste that happens in organisations, and if you can capture the value of that waste and capture the value of what it looks like not to waste, and the skill development plugs that gap, improves performance, etc. That's quite a nice way to look at it. I mean, ones that we've worked on recently. We have a client who's using our Microsoft suite of training, and they were using one of their internal trainers, an IT trainer, to deliver ad hoc lessons on Excel or PowerPoint or Teams or whatever. And that trainer wasn't getting to some of the more important things that they wanted to train on within the organisation, that were more business critical and more kind of focused on some of their own systems, and simply because there was just a lot of demand for that, and obviously that's an important part of business, being able to use the tools that you're given. And so we're able to come in with a digital solution and do that for a lot less money than what they were paying in person. I think moving to digital, just being more efficient with how and what you spend on, and also time. It's always a very easy calculation you can make around people's time. And if you're in a large organisation and people are spending a lot of time doing something that they didn't necessarily need to do, or that could be done in half the time with the right skill set, that's a very kind of easy business case to make. So yeah, I think there's a big learning and development. Sometimes forget when they're building business cases, they're trying to tap into like how's this going to link to revenue or reduce risk, and those two are definitely super important. But there's almost a more obvious one, which is like actually we can save a lot. We can save the company a lot of money here by just being way more efficient.
Yeah, I like that, and that's certainly a large number of the business cases that I've seen recently about that time saving, physical time, doing something that was either not needed or in the new world of work, we're able to speed up a bit with some of the new means of delivery. So yeah, that's interesting. So
part of the reason we do podcasts, to be honest with you, because they don't require the same screen time that you might do if you're sat and doing a piece of e-learning. You can listen. On the drive down here today, I actually turned my notes for this interview into a podcast on Google Notebook LM, and I listened back to it, and that was a great use of that time, which otherwise I'd have been, listening to Taylor Swift or something.
Nothing wrong with that. The reality is, it's great. The medium that you're using to deliver your content is one that now is so widely consumed. Right, it's a case of so our product roadmap. We do something at our organisation called Pulse, which is a monthly kind of update of all the feature releases, notes, etc. And for the first time, actually this month, they did it and shared it, both as a document and obviously the roadmap and everything, but used the podcast style LLM to individuals talking about it. Google, it's a really capable tool, isn't it, to do that? It's nice. It brought and I found way more pleasure in listening to that than I did just reading the document, which is still good, obviously, but it's just like, different means. And I consume lots of content via podcast listening. Yeah.
Well, 55% of Americans now listen to podcasts. 55% of Americans listen to a podcast, at least one podcast every month now, which is mental. That's like 158 million people or something. So the growth's been phenomenal. From I think it was in 2011, it was about 12%. Or something like that. It's now up to 55. It's been a really, really steady growth in terms of how, as a medium, there was a bit of a spike during COVID, and then the growth carried on just steadily growing. If you look at things like social media and stuff like that, they spike up and then disappear down, or they go in waves. Podcasts for 15 years have continuously, very steadily grown, and I think it shows that it's a medium and a modality that just works for a lot of people.
Yeah. Doesn't feel as much effort, not in like an unfair way to e-learning as an example, but it doesn't feel like you're in that kind of same I'm going to go and sit down and make sure I do this type of thing, but I'm going to still consume and what's the right word? Upskill, take in as much information in a similar way, probably more because I'm actually going to enjoy the process more. That's what I feel. Should we move on to the kind of final part and wrap up talking about the future of skills and think about some of the emerging skills that you think will define high performance in the next, should we give it a time frame, 5 years? It's hard to know, right? It's probably going to be very different in 2, or maybe no difference at all.
Yeah,
interesting to hear.
Well, I think a lot of people look at things like the World Economic Forum Future Jobs Report for this sort of information. But I certainly feel it within our own team as well. When I look at kind of what are the skills that are going to define high performing teams, I honestly think it's critical thinking, decision making, problem solving, capability of adapting to new things, dealing with change. I think underlying that is a relentless curiosity, a resilience to learn lessons, bounce back, change course. And I think the companies that will, and the organisations that will thrive, will care about and set up a really good system of cultivating those core skills and developing them. And then on top of that, you've got this kind of technology layer. So how do you then layer in good technology use and good technology augmentation of our human capabilities rather than technology replacing what we're doing. And there's loads of great examples in our business. When we edit podcasts now, we remove any background noise using an AI tool. We remove all the many ums and ahs that I use in every podcast I do using an AI tool. And so there's so many smart ways of using it now, and I think that kind of upskilling and development is going to become even more important as we go. One I did want to highlight actually is communication as well, because it's certainly not a lost art, but there is a generation coming through, Gen Z and coming into Gen Alpha, that have grown up in a world where asynchronous communication is more common than synchronous communication. So you and I growing up, it was a lot of the conversations were face to face. Kids growing up now in their formative teenage years, 14 to 17, a lot of their conversations are happening asynchronously via Snap or WhatsApp or whatever And that has changed how people communicate with each other, and also changed how this generation coming into the workforce is comfortable communicating and less comfortable maybe in a lot of cases in face-to-face environments. There's exceptions. There's always exceptions, and we've got some amazing young people in our team who I'd say are very, very able communicators face-to-face. But I did a series with some guys, Zab and Patrick, who run the Gen Z Coach earlier in the year, and they got me onto a book called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, and a lot of analysis in there of the impact that social media has made on Gen Z in particular, and also then how that relates to things like how to communicate, confidence, mental health, all these kind of things. So I actually think as organisations, we're going to have to pick up more of a, almost like a pastoral responsibility for people coming into the workforce now, because of a lot of the technological changes that have happened in the last few years. And Gen AI genuinely worries me with kids now, because the kind of the hard thinking and the hard work that you need to do to really learn and analyse and critique, if young people are outsourcing all of that, they're never going to learn those skills. So that's something that we need to keep in mind as well. I think that's partially solved by just basically not letting kids onto large language models until they've learned a certain amount. But there's probably bigger, broader governmental policy that we could talk about in terms of that. But yeah, coming back to future skills and performance, all of those things, all those really critical behavioural skills are where I'm at.
Yeah, I think that interestingly what you mentioned there about this idea of pastoral care. We've had a graduate program at our organisation for 10 plus years now. I think that we still have that kind of sense that you're helping all people come into an organisation, and they're not just acquiring the skills to be effective in their role, they're also learning how to do life at the same time.
Yeah.
There's still those elements associated with it. And I was one of those people, so I've been through that kind of change curve and learning curve myself. I do think that there's this thing of like, the technology's changed, the name's changed, it's LLM rather than World Wide Web, or it's something, another acronym. But for me, it feels like a lot of it is still similar kind of concepts, being able to deal with. It's just moving quicker, I think, and that makes it more challenging potentially to deal with the change. And I do think you're right though in terms of those critical skills. I wonder, apart from things like, can you become high performing if you prompt more efficiently or effectively, right? That might be a completely different skill that comes out. I
definitely think you can, but I think the real skill will be in discerning good information from bad, because in the information age, we have so much information available at our fingertips. So if you want to know anything, any time of the day or night, we can pull out your phone. You can talk into your phone now, and you could get within 5 minutes on a large language model, I could get a really detailed report citing loads of different sources, and I do this sort of stuff when I'm researching for projects we're working on and new kind of things we're putting together. And I started to, as my bit of advice at the beginning of the podcast, I started to dive more into that. Okay, well, where are these sources from, and are they credible? And it's really interesting because I'd say 50% of them were completely uncredible. 50% of them were Reddit or Wikipedia. And yes, there's opinion or there's stuff in there, but a lot of them were not scientifically based. Were not kind of properly cited, and so there is a challenge with any new technology of being skeptical enough to look into where that data is coming from and understanding its limitations. And I guess the really tricky thing is that every day the limitations change and it gets a little bit better. So knowing what bit of it to trust. But again, that's a skills issue. How do we keep on top of using this technology correctly? I think that's got to be one of the big kind of drivers behind productivity and high performance is making sure that people are using these tools really, really well and really effectively.
And I'm not disagreeing with you at all in that respect, but I still believe that critical thinking, which is probably part of it, critical analysis, as an example, those we talked about trust, bias, understanding bias, those probably are still elements that exist in high performance now that need to be probably elevated. Is that what we're saying in the future, even more so? But I'd say that the skill set still feels similar to what high performance looks like, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
They're still similar, that maybe just need to be elevated. So I always think we always go through it feels cyclical. We always have these kind of cycles. So probably the core capabilities are fairly similar. Obviously, there's nuance in there. What about from an Assemble U perspective? How do you see Assemble U evolving to help companies build skills-based performance cultures. Are there things in there? I know you've also got lots of critical skills content, and you've got lots of a broad range of different topics, but are there any things that you're specifically focusing on as you go forward?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think we want to develop more tools and services to enable people to better deploy and use the content that we do produce. So our content is all very, I was talking about Google Notebook Alarm, but our content is all very human-led, tapping into stories and experiences and things like that. And it's great. We combine it with things like reflection points to help people think about how this would apply into their role. But almost the next stage is like, okay, then how do we add the organisational lens to that? How do we make sure that's hyper applicable to the challenges that they're trying to solve? So yeah, that's definitely a way we're thinking about that a lot and moving into different solutions for that. But the other thing, I just like on a macro point of view, I look at it in kind of three ways. I think there's going to be three big tranches of skills that feed into high performance. One of them is the human behavioural skills, business critical skills we've been talking about. One is technology, understanding, using, leveraging, augmenting. And then the third is risk and assurance. So being confident that your people are doing things appropriately, right, all that kind of stuff. So human technology assured, human technology compliant, whatever you want to call it. And so we're thinking about, okay, so how do we move the company towards serving all of those sectors and serving them really well and serving them in our unique way as well, which is obviously learning designed to be kind of consumed on the go.
Yeah, so it sounds like three prongs that are very focused and certainly very relevant. If you're looking at the customers, partners, organisations that you work with, do you think there's anything, or is there one thing or a few things that you've identified that they can maybe make a change tomorrow that would have an impact on their skills-based performance or moving towards becoming a skills-based performance-focused organisation?
Yeah, I just take it seriously. Take skills really seriously, and get really good at building business cases and get out there and talk to people. So if you're in learning development or HR listening, understand the business, build the business case. If you're a leader listening to this, it's understanding just how important skills really are. Actually, there's a great book by Will Tallheimer that he released earlier this year on. And it's aimed at CEOs and the C-suite on kind of the importance of learning. So yeah, I recommend, I can't remember what it's called now, but I would recommend that book as a good place to start if you're a leader and you're kind of looking to justify spending on learning. He lays it out in a really interesting and convincing way.
It feels like it's great, and we hopefully put the link to that book if we can find it. For everyone to have a look at. I haven't read it, I certainly like it. I think it's relevant. It's certainly relevant to a passion that I've got. I want to, from an organisational perspective, help people prove the impact of L&D. I feel like it's the thing that we're here as a partner to do, and I think that actually technology hasn't always been focused on that. And I kind of felt a little bit, not let down, but maybe a little bit disappointed by the industry with this whole like AI first nomenclature that came around and started to kind of label everything as AI first. I'm like, AI first, so what? AI first, so what happens? AI first, what does it mean? And we've certainly not gone down that path ourselves, using AI absolutely to speed things up and make a difference, but I believe in outcomes first. It's like you've got to deliver an outcome, you've got to focus there, and I think that L&D has to be an outcomes, a value centre. It has to be labelled as that. I also think there's another part which probably is a bit basic to say, but links to what I said earlier. I feel like we've spent most providers, and most of the time we talk about learning too much. It's development that for me is is under-indexed in that learning and development title.
It's actually performance, isn't it?
It's performance. Yeah, that's it.
Trying to get
that's where exactly, and that's what we talked about earlier. So. Well, Adam, it's been really great to talk through these topics. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to end on in terms of a thought or something for organisations to take away in relation to this topic, or something you're doing in the future that you'd like to share in relation to the topic. You're obviously welcome to do that.
That's very kind. I would just say, do connect with me on LinkedIn if you can find me there, and yeah, the website is assembleu.com if you want to have a look at some of the work that we do bringing podcasts into them.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Adam.
Cheers, Harry.
Cheers.